You're listening to the American edition of The Voice of Russia, and I'm Justin Mitchell. It's pretty much impossible to escape that today is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy. It's a monumental event in American history, but it is also a monumental event in the history of the media in America. Today I'm joined by Eric Rothenbuhler. He's the Dean of the School of Communications at Webster University. We are going to discuss the Kennedy assassination and the development of the media from back then to today. So Eric Rothenbuhler, thanks so much for joining us here on Voice of Russia today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So obviously we've come a long way since November 22nd, 1963, both in terms of politics and history and also the development of the media. For people who are younger out there who might not remember, could you explain kind of what the media landscape was like back then?
Yeah, well, at that time here in the United States, every major city had 3 television channels and 3 only. There were many fewer radio stations then than there are now, and every city had 1 or 2 major daily newspapers. So news came from a few sources, and those sources were considered authoritative, and the news report was something that came out once a day and presented stories written in past tense.
Right, and then on November 22nd, there was obviously a momentous event. How did this event, the Kennedy assassination, break in the media?
Well, the story broke in the media when the television broadcasters and radio as well, though that's less remembered, interrupted their normal programming at that time, which would have been entertainment programming, for a news bulletin. In terms of the history of media, though, there were actually 2 events that week that were important. One was the assassination, which was a breaking news event, and the other was the funeral, which was a major media event of its own.
Kennedy's funeral in Washington, D.C.
That's right, Kennedy's funeral a few days later.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you said there was a breaking news report. They broke into their regular programming. Was this the first time something like this had happened?
No, breaking into programming for important news events was something that was done at the time, but this was certainly the biggest example of that and the most important story, the most dominating example of that up to that point in television history.
Sure. I mean, the coverage went on for hours, for
That's
days,
right?
Yeah, I don't even know how long the major networks were on that story and that story alone, but it was for a while, right?
And since then, it's probably hard to find something else that dominated the media to such an extent until we get to 9/11, where the entire normal operation of the media was shut down for some days. Advertising suspended. When the advertisers stop advertising, something special's going on.
Right, and we were discussing this earlier. You brought up a concept of media memory, and you said the JFK assassination and its coverage played a large part in creating this concept. Could you elaborate on that for me a little bit?
Well, one of the things that happened as with the rise of television news in the 60s, up until that time, television news was considered pretty minor. It was the newspaper is where you got serious news. But through the 60s, we got the rise of the importance of television news, built around a couple of key personalities who were anchors of the time, Cronkite and Huntley and Brinkley and others, and some reporters who went on to be famous. But you can kind of mark the beginning of that with the Kennedy assassination story, when all of those later to be famous reporters and anchors were either in Dallas or they were in the network headquarters anchoring that breaking news.
It's a rather remarkably long list. I mean, we're talking about Dan Rather, Robert McNeil, both him and Jim Lehrer, who went on to host the famous PBS program, were there. And they all just happened to be there that day, and they became some of the primary personalities in TV news for a while. Is that right? Yeah.
And so remembering the Kennedy assassination and remembering who was there as our media witness became intimately tied with the rise of the careers of certain people, but also with the rise of the importance and social status of television and television news.
How important in the coverage of the Kennedy assassination at each anniversary and then this year is the way that story broke in the media, in your opinion? How important is it to the coverage?
You can see it playing a huge role, especially this year as we get to the biggest anniversary so far. As you see all of the television stories and newspaper articles and so on, you can't escape stories about the role of the media in this. And the media become the medium of memory, and they are in many ways remembering themselves. They're producing documentaries about the role of television in this, and not only in the coverage of the assassination, but in the American attention to the funeral. It became a television event, and was a marker, a standard setter for a form of ceremonial television you can think of as a media event, where in living rooms all over the country, people felt that they were participating in the funeral, that they were witnessing the funeral, and were a part of that ceremonial event.
And that was something that maybe hadn't happened before, right?
Not to that extent, not anywhere near that extent.
And we have the iconic image from that of John F. Kennedy Jr. saluting his father's
Right.
as a casket as it came by. Interesting. So I understand one of your specialties is ritual communication, and the funeral kind of plays into that to a point. Could you explain to me what ritual communication is?
Yeah. Every society has a set of rituals, annual holidays, key transition events in our personal lives like weddings and funerals and births and so on, and key transition points in our political events like for Americans the presidential inauguration and other sorts of events. Every organization has rituals, a swearing-in ceremony, an initiation ceremony, a retirement party, and so on that we use to mark the comings and goings of people and our changes of social status. As the media became important participants in our social order in the 20th century, they became participants in these ritual events and in this process by which a society marks both the passage of time and continuity with time. And so look at Obama's inauguration. It became a multimedia event, and we had the inauguration on broadcast channels and cable channels and in newspapers and on internet, on web pages, and so on. His first inauguration set records for the number of updates on Facebook pages, for example. Mm-hmm. And so we participated in that ceremonial event, that ritual event, via our use of media.
All right, and now coming 50 years later to the huge anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, how has the coverage of his assassination and also of his funeral a few days later changed the media, and how are those changes visible in the media today?
Well, for many years, you saw the rise of the authority of television news and the network television news in particular. Since the spread of cable television and then cable news channels, 24-hour cable news channels, and then news web pages, and every organization has a web page, and so the difference between a newspaper and a radio station and a television channel on the web, they're all the same. They're all a multimedia news operation, and now with social media, Twitter feeds, Facebook updates, and so on, we participate in a tremendous multimedia flow of these events, and so we're plugged in many more ways, and our attention is drawn in many different ways to many more things.
All right. Do you feel there's any of these phenomena that can be traced directly back to the Kennedy assassination, or is it more just sort of a general progression?
Well, what you see today are the media in this flow of stories and the flow of people's attention. We still need markers of special occasions. We still need some way to think and recognize that some things are more important than other things. And so
it's like everything's really important right now.
That's right.
We have these huge red letters on CNN all the time
That's
saying
absolutely
breaking news
right.
live right now. So
every Twitter feed claims to be just as important as the last one. But human consciousness and social order, we need to to have markers. We need to have a geography of attention and a geography of value, where some things are high points and are more important than others.
How much more or less difficult is Barack Obama's attempts to unite this country than, say, John F. Kennedy's back then, due to the media landscape, in your opinion?
Enormously more difficult.
All right, that's great. We've been talking with Eric Rothenbuhler. He's the Dean of the School of Communications at Webster University, and we've been discussing the media marker of today, the 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination, a monumental historical and media event. Eric, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And I'm Justin Mitchell, and you are listening to the American edition of The Voice of Russia.